From game day to signing day, breaking down every snap and all the news on Alabama's top football recruits. It's time for Crimson and Blue Chips with your host, John Garcia Jr.
After much fanfare and even some requests via Twitter in a poll where we didn't even include the man, we have finally gotten Tim Watts back on Crimson and Blue Chips, the owner, editor, publisher of Bama Online, of course the Alabama site on 24/7 Sports, and our partners here at Crimson and Blue Chips. Tim, fall season's here. There's a lot of directions we can go in, but you're a Birmingham guy, and we've been waiting on this kid to play and start for so long. I want to start with Saturday at the Hoover Met. Robby Ashford, 6'4", 210, four-star guy without ever starting a varsity game. People gave me some crap for it, but I think we finally got to see a little bit of what we had been hearing about for a long time. 383 yards, 4 touchdowns on national TV. How surprised were you with Robby Ashford's Hoover debut as a starter?
You know, I've been watching Robby so long. My second son, second oldest son, played against Robby when they were like 6 to 11. Both of them were playing up. Robby was already he was playing up because he was too big, I think. Weight-wise, he couldn't even have been a quarterback. I think he'd have had to have been a lineman. So they played against each other, and they played against baseball against each other their whole life, even playing the same showcase baseball program. So super familiar with Robby. I'm not surprised I know what kind of player he is. I know what kind of kid he is. I know he's a good worker, hard worker, a freak athlete. You know, as big as he is, Robby's always been that kid, you know, 2 or 3 years ago where the parents were yelling on the team, you know, hey, I want to see his birth certificate or he drove here. You know, Robby, there's always that kid that looks, he's a legit age. He's actually young for his age. He should be a freshman. I mean, he should be a freshman right now.
Yeah, he's 15, right?
That's amazing. That is amazing.
Yeah.
He's going to be 17-year-old freshman in college for football. I mean, it's amazing. That's what a kind of freak he is. But he's always been that big kid, not just tall but thick, broad-chested. And he's fast. He's fast. He's got a cannon. I mean, he can do it all. So I'm not surprised that Robby's able to do that. Now, it's very impressive to me. I'm sure it is to you that the kid steps up, ESPN, Pinson Valley, defending state champs in a duel against Bo Nix, who we all love. Thinks a terrific quarterback prospect in his own right. A lot of pressure, big showcase game, and for him to play so well. Obviously, he made some mistakes. I mean, I know his critics will say, you know, he made a couple of bad decisions, but that's to be expected in his first significant play in time. But I thought overall, I mean, I'd have gave him an A for his effort. I thought he settled in nice. He knew when to pull it down. One of the things I thought he did well that might go unnoticed is he pulled it down, got the first, and got out of bounds, which I know what Coach Niblett wants. He doesn't want him taking those hits and getting dinged up. You know, this isn't the little league level now. It's the varsity where people can hurt you. So I thought he played a really smart game. And, you know, of course, it helps having, you know, Mr. Pickens, you know, over there to bail you out on a few times. But I thought Robby did a great job.
Yeah, you know, I thought, like you said, you know, he really was determined to sit in the pocket, and when he ran, it was conservative. It wasn't. We didn't really see the true dual threat Robby Ashford. So you talk about him being a freak athlete and all that. One, how good is he in baseball? Because we hear a lot, oh, this kid's really good in baseball, and you get different extremes. You've got the Kyler Murrays of the world who go first round and are that type of potential major league talent, and then you get kind of fluff. I remember with Justin Fields, there was a lot of baseball talk, never really materialized. I remember with Jake Fromm, there was a lot of baseball talk, never really materialized. So where is Robby in that spectrum, just in your opinion, having seen him, and athletically when he does pull it down and run? I mean, what type of runner are we talking about? Because that's really the one element where we didn't truly get to see him, I guess, on full display.
Yeah, I hate to compare. I'm not great on comparison, but when Robby was young, he looked like Cam Newton. He wore Cam Newton's number. He had the back plate hanging out like Cam Newton. He ran like Cam. Robby's that kid that can roll out to the right and decide he's going to pull it down, and he can run 50, 60 yards against kids his age. Now, obviously, at the varsity level, it's going to be a little bit different, a little bit harder, but running's never been a problem. What I saw Saturday, to me, was Robby trying to show people I'm not a running quarterback. I'm a passer. I think because that was the biggest question. You know, everybody said, can he pass? Can he be consistent? I mean, I think that's a fair enough question with any quarterback. I mean, we're still seeing it with Jalen Hurts, Alabama. Can he pass? Can he be consistent? That's just one of the ways we critique a quarterback. I think he was determined to show that, and he did. Had Niblett chose to put in a offense where they're going to run the ball and showcase his running ability, he probably had a couple 100 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. That's the kind of athlete he is. He's not easy to bring down, as you can imagine. He's massive. His lower body's thick, and he is fast. He is fast. You know, moving to baseball this year before he was hurt, Hoover was a really good baseball team, and they were quick. They had 6 or 7 guys that could run. They ran a lot, pressured the ball a lot. Any ball hit on the infield, you know, it's not just about getting hits. They'd hit a ball to a third baseman. He's got to field it and get it out of his glove. So a quick team, they pressured him a lot, and Robby was leading off when I saw him. So if that tells you anything, you know, as a freshman on the varsity, a pretty good Hoover baseball team, monster-type athlete. I think there's more NFL future for Robby than there is baseball right now, partly because the baseball draft is a mystery to me. Kyler Murray hit like 310 or whatever he hit, nothing super impressive, and he was drafted that high overall. So I don't really know what the scouts are looking for. There's so many drafts and so many different ways, so much goes on with that. For me, I think Robby's a future NFL player, especially if he continues to develop like he has shown. And don't forget, this kid, and I don't know, every quarterback doesn't need a red shirt, so I don't want to label him there, but this kid is a classic candidate for red shirt and just take to 18 years old.
Sure.
He could red shirt and then be an 18-year-old starter, which is unheard of, in a lot of cases with a quarterback. So this is a guy that's young, that's, I think, going to keep developing as a football player. Baseball, he's really good, especially he's fast and he can hit. He's a big guy. He's what you'd expect with baseball. I didn't get a look at him. He was hurt early in the high school season. I didn't get as much of a look as I would have liked to. He got hurt early in the high school baseball season and didn't play showcase baseball this summer. But I think it's a pretty good situation for him to be in, depending on which sport he wants to play.
Yeah, that'll be a secondary storyline for sure with Ashford. Again, guys, Bama has not yet offered, but is recruiting Robby. He's visited multiple times. He's very familiar. Actually grew up a Bama fan, so that's something to keep an eye on if and maybe when Alabama does pull the trigger. Remember, the Tide does have a 2020 quarterback in Jacksonville's Carson Beck, and we'll see. It's a long way to go with the recruiting plan. How many quarterbacks you're going to take? Is there attrition? Those are questions, obviously, still to be answered. Speaking of recruiting, as Tim Watts from BamaOnline.com joins us. Tim, I think we've gotten away from it a little bit on the podcast, and you're always good to kind of bring us down to earth, center us on the general picture. We get so into Evan Neal versus Darnell Wright on this show, or, just super in-depth. How about we back off and kind of look at the general scope of Alabama recruiting? More than 20 commitments, top 2 recruiting class, depending on where you're looking. What's the general plan for Alabama right now? We know there's not a ton of officials coming up, so where do you look at it as we kind of reset where Bama is with this 2019 class just as of the end of August?
Yeah, I always like to remind Alabama fans, Alabama's recruiting ebbs and flows so much, more than any other school that I'm aware of, because when it's time to football, that's what the focus is. They are worried about winning games. They're worried about coaching football. They're still recruiting, obviously. They're still recruiting, but their focus is on those games. Now, some schools have the luxury where they're not so much focused on winning or just, trying to win. They're not really contending. Alabama's usually contending for a playoff spot. The SEC playing a tough division where every week you really have to be focused on this. So you'll see Alabama, you'll see that ebb and flow. After signing day, we saw that big push, a lot of offers out. They were evaluating the heck out of kids. A lot of offers went out. Got a little break during, pause during spring break. Things get quiet. Alabama fans panic. Why haven't we got a commitment 32 hours? They're screaming at me and you. And then they turn around and they go through the summer. They get those kids into camp evals. They get those offers out, and you see the summer flurry, a lot of activity. And that's how we got to 20. Well, now, what's here. And it's probably going to be a little bit quieter. Alabama's not huge on having official visitors to game day, simply because, an official visit when you don't have a game, a kid will fly in on Friday, leisurely pace. He'll stay through breakfast with Nick Saban and Miss Terry at his house through Sunday morning. There's not a rush. Well, if you had a football game, you had a walkthrough, you had a, game prep, sleeping somewhere else on Friday night, Sunday morning after the game, and the banged up people and a lot of stuff to start getting ready the next week. Really short official visits. So I know they're not great. They're not huge on having those. Obviously, the early signing period changed that a little bit because now you've got kids that want to take. So that comes down to if the kid's a priority and they've got, the kid's like, I've got to take these visits. I'm deciding in December, they try to work them in. But I think that's, ideally you want to have that really big weekend. Say you have a big game like LSU or something. You'll see some guys coming in groups. Or you want to have it the smaller games where it's a little bit, not that they're more laid back, but the atmosphere is a little laid back. Because, the week of the Auburn game, you're going to have 2 country singers, a NASCAR driver, 1 rapper, and 2 actors there hanging out
and
on
20
the
former
sideline.
players as well.
Absolutely. And I don't blame them. I'd come too if they invited me. So you're going to have that. So that distraction versus smaller game where you're not really going to have as many people. The crowd, it's going to be a blowout. The crowd will be gone by halftime. The students will be partying, by 8 p.m. So so we're going to see that. So I think it'll be a little bit quiet now. Obviously, Alabama set self up in a great position for a top class. And I think we'll see as the season goes on, they'll start picking. And let's don't forget, I know you know this, but fans got to remember, Alabama's in the last push for their evaluations. They're evaluating senior film. Guys like Mark Ingram, Josh Jacobs, there's been a lot of guys pop up as seniors.
Eddie Jackson.
That Eddie Jackson's a great example. Hurt his junior year, popped up. There's guys that pop up. They're going to be evaluating, and that's good and bad. Now you can lose. You can go from a top priority to less of a priority, and if it wasn't a priority, can jump up to the top priority. So they're still evaluating guys. I mean, we know Alabama, especially Nick Saban, is really thorough with his evaluation. So it might seem slow, but there's still going to be a lot of activity here in the final few months.
Yeah, it always makes you wonder in recruiting. Some of these kids get offers so early, right? I mean, Robby Ashford, we were just talking about, multiple SEC offers literally before starting a varsity game, and now he's continuing to get offers. Florida State jumped in on Wednesday. How important is it to kind of continue pushing? Have you, and I'm sure you know specific names, I don't know if you want to mention them, but I mean, will Bama drop a guy for a bad senior season and or shift him from commitment to say, hey, maybe you should delay your enrollment, maybe you should be a gray shirt? We've seen some late stories, but how much of that is based solely on that senior season, what they put on tape?
I think Alabama does good enough. You know what? It'll help. I'll tell you this. If you're in camp, you had good junior film, and you passed the eyeball test, like you did a really good job. Not being in camp, I think that's why, I've always said it. Being at Alabama's camp is so big to get an offer, hold an offer, be able to commit because they can see, are you 5'11" or are you 6'1"? What's the difference? Are you 5', or are you actually 5'8"? They can see that. So I think all that just factors into different degrees. I've been doing this 20 years. People have always, it's funny, I've never really heard the backlash from dropping kids until Nick Saban did it at Alabama, did it, where he had kids go somewhere else or what. Schools have been doing this for 20 years. Last year I saw 50 kids it happened to 50 kids, just stone cold drop. I don't think Alabama does it in that kind of way. I think they do have discussions. And, a lot of times, their commitment's contingent on grades. I know kids that the public perception was they got dropped because of talent, but really it was because of grades. They didn't do what they needed to do to be eligible. Nadab Joseph is a guy that academically wasn't where he needed to be last year. The Alabama staff liked him, wanted to sign him, but couldn't sign him because of his transcript. But, with the limit on the number of people you can sign, they weren't willing to risk. They wanted to wait till later to make sure he was going to be okay. Everybody made a huge fuss, Georgia, Alabama, but Alabama said, I can't sign you right now. I've got to see what your grade situation is. And he rushed, signed with Georgia, just on a day or two's notice, and ended up at Independence Community College. So grades factor in there heavily. How a kid behaves on and off the field. In fact, I think this is the case of a lot of schools. Teenage football alpha males are allowed some leeway, I think, to do stupid stuff. I have teenage boys, and they do stupid stuff every day. So, you give them some leeway. So, but I think high character concerns, obviously, someone getting arrested. I've seen pretty much everything. I've seen kids get in trouble and lose that thing. I think the guys Alabama likes. I think they're pretty good. I think they have committed. I think they're pretty comfortable with them right now. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of toss and turns. We've seen Georgia take a couple of qualified commitments the last couple of years and send them to JUCO for a semester and then bring them back, which is a smart way to, keep that kid. And we've seen some end up at other schools. So yeah, there's all kind of different ways to sort of work that scholarship, that situation. I hate to use the word drop for any school because I don't know the circumstances, but I see kids that were committed that are no longer committed. And most of them seem okay with it. So I'm assuming that the coaching staff, and I'm talking about at any school, has had a discussion with them. If they did it ugly and unceremoniously, I think we'd hear about it more on Twitter. I think the kids, especially their parents. I mean, I know what I would do. You know what I mean? If my kid was committed for, 22 months and then all of a sudden told the day before signing day he doesn't have a spot, I would not be happy.
Sure, yeah, and like I said, it's the way they've been dropped has been kind of graciously like, hey, parted ways, or maybe you should look elsewhere. They get a little bit more of a heads up, and everybody kind of understands, at least to the largest degree. So you have a lot of different phases of the recruiting process, but then there are these guys, Tim, where Bama loves them. We know they like Bama, but they're just not guys who are going to commit early. These are usually 5 stars. So in this group now, you've got Trey Sanders, Evan Neal, Nakobe Dean. But then there's Clay Webb. And I know I didn't ask you about Clay, but this is a question we continue to get Clay questions since he was a sophomore. He's still uncommitted. And for 99% of the kids, and I always say this, I don't really believe them when they just say, I want to make a late decision. I often believe they already know going, for the most part, and are probably a silent verbal commitment. But with Clay Webb, I actually believe the opposite. I believe what he's saying. He has said December for the last 6 months, and he darn sure looks like he's on track to make that call in December, whether it's Bama, Auburn, Georgia. Clemson is in it more than people realize. Where do you sit on the Clay Webb conversation just in general, and what does it mean for him to be what we think a kid where, basically whenever to jump in, he has that chance? How rare is that for a school like Alabama that consistently brings in 5 stars and number 1 type prospects?
Yeah, Clay's recruitment's beginning to remind me of Julio Jones. I remember talking to Julio before he was up at the Hoover 707 before he just became a household name. That's if you Google, that's the tournament where he was like had his his crotch above a kid's head making a one-armed catch in that tournament. It's just one of the most insane photos I've ever seen. He was about to just quickly blow up. I spoke to him under the bleachers in between games. It was quiet. It was just me and him, and Coach Watson was sitting nearby, and we talked for about 20 minutes. And it was hard. I knew right away, and he just kept saying, I don't like talking about myself. And, he was just like, how I'm going to handle this is I'm just going to keep my mouth shut, and I'm going to go through this process. I'm going to make the best decision for me when I feel it's the best decision was basically the bottom line. Real polite, real quiet. When I met Clay and talked to Clay he was wrestling up at Thompson last year, I got that same vibe. It wasn't like I hate the recruiting process, which we get to those guys, or it wasn't I don't want to talk or I can't talk. It's just I'm just not a kind of guy to talk about myself. So I got that same vibe from Clay got from Julio Jones. Now Julio didn't say crap the rest of his career. You know what I mean? I don't know if he talked with the Falcons.
I was going to say he still hasn't really. I mean, he held out for a little bit and people freaked out, but he was like, "Yeah, I was always coming here. Y'all just didn't talk to me."
You don't even hear his name. It's one of the most amazing things. And even there was that scene in some show they were doing with Nick Saban. And Nick Saban walked up, Julio was stretching, and he was like, "So, hey, we having a conversation today, or should I keep going?" And Julio had his head between his knees bent, and he just pointed to the right. Keep walking. Julio wasn't talking to anybody. So just a quiet guy. I think Clay's that way. Clay's super polite. He's super nice. He's talking more than Julio, obviously, but he's really not saying much. That's the thing about it. When I look at recruitment, and I started saying this about 2 months ago, if you remember, maybe right start of summer. When I look up and Auburn feels pretty confident, and Clemson feels confident, and Georgia feels confident, and Alabama feels confident, then I no longer feel confident about anything.
Right.
That's simply because I think the kid's being good and he's going through the process. And I understand there's some people around him that think it's Georgia. Some people around him think it's Bama. Some people around him think it's Auburn. I'm not familiar with Clemson at this point, but I do know they think they're in it. So I get there's people, but Clay's not saying anything, and Clay's like Julio, in my opinion, is he's going to make his own decision. It's not going to matter about. I think Clay Webb's going to make a grown man decision, and he's going to make it on his own, based on how he feels and what he wants. To be honest with you, what Julio Jones did, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I just think it's hard to speculate. I wouldn't consider him a lock anywhere. Really good football player. I get there's a lot of discussion about him. It's a huge deal because he's such a high-profile recruit. But as far as insight right now, I think he's wide open. I agree with you. I think he is going to go through the process. I know he still talks to all four of those schools. I know he's going to take his official visits. With a kid like that, when I asked him, what are you looking for in the school, and he said, I don't know yet, then it's hard to speculate. Is he looking for depth charts? Is he looking for pretty girls, warm weather? Usually, usually these kids give us a hint. They'll say something
playing
like
time, home feeling, the typical stuff.
Yeah, it's close to mom. Any of that stuff. Clay, I think, is just going to make his decision based on what he feels, and that nothing wrong with that. He strikes me as a mature kid, and I think he'll make a good decision.
Tim, around for Julio's recruitment, and God bless you for weathering Hoover 7-on-7. For those who don't know, mid-July, all day, a million degrees. It is a grind of an event. Was it always Bama for him, though, even when you talked to him, and even though he didn't really talk a ton? Was there a sense that it was always going to be Bama, or at some point did it feel like what we think with Clay and say, hey, you know what? He could legitimately go in either direction. He's probably not a silent commit, anything like that. Was there a sense of any of that with Julio, or was it more of it's just a matter of time when he picks Bama? He's just not going to trumpet it like some kids would.
Not to me. To me, I always felt Julio was going to end up at Alabama. I never would have called him a lock. I would have said Alabama leads. I thought Nick Saban took over recruitment. I knew a guy that was really close to Julio that sort of kept me in the loop there. He really didn't tip his hand. There's always these people looking like, you spell Julio and there's an OAU, he's got to be going to Oklahoma. There's always these stupid ways they're trying to connect everything. But I always felt Julio was going to Alabama. But I felt it was a good situation for him. Alabama had targeted Julio in that whole Mobile area. Burton Scott, B.J. Scott, was a big-time recruit, very influential. Kids looked up to him. He was the first kid. He was a Viger that gave Alabama street cred. He was one of the first kids that before Saban, Burton Scott was going somewhere else. He was going to FSU. He was going to Florida. He was going to LSU. So I felt like Alabama was always in good shape. But, again, I never would have caught him with a lock. With Clay, I feel similar to that. But I will say Clay does have relatives in Athens, and not that I think that's the end-all, be-all. I think, that's a little overrated, where family is. He's at Alabama. He's not that far from Athens, or vice versa. If he's in Athens, he's not that far from Oxford. But with Clay, I feel a little less certainty. We've seen this game played along. Marlon Humphrey was great at the game. Everybody had him locked for FSU. I never thought for a second he was going anywhere other than Alabama. With Clay, I don't think there's as strong as a connection. For Alabama with Julio, there was an urgency because they were trying to cement that class. State of Alabama had been running. Players at that time had been leaving everywhere. They had kids at Notre Dame. They had kids at Florida, kids at Tennessee, kids at LSU. Nick Saban was getting a lot of good players from South Alabama. So that was the class Nick Saban came in, even though he came in the class earlier, but he was already working on that 08 class in 07. So I felt like Alabama was going to win that battle, and that Nick Saban tends to win that. But now you're talking about offensive linemen, and Alabama's going to get offensive linemen whether they get Clay Webb or not. And it's, you say the same thing for Evan Neal or Darn White. They're going to get good offensive linemen. It's a little bit different because Julio came to a place where he knew he was the man at wide receiver.
Yep.
I ain't the guy. They're going to throw me the ball. In fact, they're not going to put anybody else on the other side of the field. They're just going to throw it to me. And, that's sort of what happened. So, not the same feel. I feel like Clay's a little bit more open. And, and obviously he talks. But like I said, I think Clay's a good kid, a smart kid, a mature kid, and I think whatever decision he makes will be the best for him, which is basically all you can ask for.
This is why we bring people like Tim Watts on Crimson and Blue Chips to educate everybody, including me, about the battles of yesteryear and sometimes how they can relate and kind of prepare you for covering a kid in 2018. So we appreciate that, Tim. So we talked recruiting. We talked about the scope of Alabama's class and the timeline forward. But the immediate timeline, if you're a Crimson Tide fan, is Saturday, Louisville, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 Central, Camping World Stadium in Orlando. I know we've had you on before. We probably asked you about Tua versus Jalen at that point. Is that the most compelling thing you're looking at going into this game, or does it lie elsewhere? What should Alabama fans be looking for on Saturday? Because I think both quarterbacks play, and you know, no matter what. So what are you looking for?
Yeah.
What can you possibly learn Saturday?
Yeah, you know, the thing about it is I get why the discussion is who's rolling out first, Tua or Jalen. I get why that's the hot topic of discussion. Me personally, I think Alabama's offense is going to be fine with either quarterback. I'm not saying I don't think Tua is a better player than Jalen Hurts. I do think Tua is a better passer, obviously. I think some people have forgotten how great Jalen Hurts is with his legs, though. I mean, Tua is definitely a superior passer. Jalen's a game changer with his legs. I mean, you know, Alabama lost Clemson that year, but that run in the national championship game that gave them a chance for almost 9 times out of 10 they'd have won that ball game is special. So to me, I think the offense is fine. The offense is good shape. For me, the biggest thing I'm waiting to see is the secondary. So much talent was lost. So much, you know, so many familiar multi-year starters. I mean, and it's not that I doubt the talent level, because when you look at, you know, Pat Surtain's the number 1 defensive back in the country, or Savion Smith is the number 1 junior college, defensive back in the country. Xavier McKinley, Shy Carter, Deontay Thompson's really the only one with experience. The talent level's there. I just want to see him matched up against a pretty good offensive mind in Petrino and see how they stack up. I mean, obviously the linebackers are going to be it's going to be a lot of fun to watch Christian Miller, Mack, Moses, and Anthony, you know, running around in that, you know, in the middle of that defense. That's going to be fun, and the front line's going to be good. But to me, I'm more interested to see this talent. I've waited a long time to see some of these defensive backs, and you know, we've got little glimpses of Diggs and little glimpses of Deontay Thompson when the injury went down and he came up huge. But we've heard so much about him. I'm really excited to see him from the offensive side of the ball. I mean, you're looking at a lot of you know, good offensive line, great wide receivers, great running backs. So I think both quarterbacks are posed to be successful. You know, me, I'm a Tua guy. I'm a guy that likes to pass the ball and move the ball. At the same time, I'm not a guy. I was a little critical of Jalen last year. I thought he was one-dimensional. Took a little heat to start the year. I thought his passing was far behind his running, and I think that was his first instinct was to run. And when he does run, there's nothing wrong with it. The guy's a tremendous running back, and he's made some throws. Me, I'm excited. I want to see Tua. You know, he's a passer. I think a lot of people are, but I'm comfortable with either of them in this game at quarterback. So, Tua, I just want to see. We've only got a glimpse. You know, we got 2 quarters of him. Saw him against Vanderbilt. 2 quarters against Georgia. We saw him against Vanderbilt, and you know, in some little areas. But I'd like to see him. You know, I just really want to see what the guy can do. But then again, I'm not selling Jalen short either.
Yeah, and again, Tua, it's like both ways. Tua's a pretty good athlete as well. So I'm with you. I think regardless of the quarterback situation, Bama should be good. I'm much more curious about Louisville's quarterback and his big receivers. All 4 of their top guys, 6'2" or better. You mentioned the inexperienced secondary. We would think conventionally that Alabama would be winning this game at some point, perhaps forcing more throwing from Louisville. So I think that matchup is going to reveal itself one way or the other for Alabama. I'm with you there, but obviously that's a storyline that I would think, Tim, probably doesn't end Saturday regardless, quarterback-wise for Alabama. Or you got a prediction on that or the game itself?
I think Alabama might be a slower first half. We've seen Nick Saban come out in these type of games. He's going to want to put his secondary. He's not going to want to be, you know, he's not going to want to score on, you know, 2-play drives. He's going to want to push Louisville. They're probably not going to be as deep as Alabama. their defense isn't going to be as deep as Alabama's offense, so they probably want to control that game. Obviously, when you got Najee, Damian and guys like that, we're forgetting Brian Robinson almost. When you got guys like that, that's a really comfortable safety net to have. Those guys can lead. You don't necessarily need a quarterback to lead this team. You got great offensive line, running back, but when they do drop back to pass, tremendous athletes at the wide receiver position, as we saw last year. And as with Shavers was a redshirt, I'm really excited about that guy to see what he can do. So offensively, I think they've got a lot to work with. Defensively, I think they got to protect those DBs a little bit. Again, Bobby Petrino, Petrino's a smart dude. We all know he's a guy that can test the defense, can test the secondary. He'll have a great game plan. They've had the whole year to prepare for this. I think Bama wins. I think Bama's the most talented team. But I do think we'll probably, confuse the young guys early on, and probably have a couple of plays there that we don't normally see from Alabama secondary. But that's sort of nature of the beast when you got young guys. High risk, high reward. I think at the end of the day they'll be fine.
Yeah, definitely feels like it's more about the end of the season when the games get that much more critical. Either way, Tim, we'll let you go from there. We got the recruiting fix. We got the eval fix on the most, maybe hot kid or intriguing kid in the state in Robby Ashford. We got a Julio Jones flashback and some Bama Louisville analysis. Literally a one-stop shop. Tim Watts, and that's what you can get at BamaOnline.com. Start the free trial. It'll take you through week 1, so you'll get the entire game coverage, analysis, all of that from the crew at BOL, which includes Kirk McNair, who's been on the show, Charlie Potter, who's been on the show, even Hank South. So check those guys out, BOL, BamaOnline.com. Tim, enjoy your weekend. Thanks for joining us once again, and I guess we'll see if you crack the next Twitter poll we put out there.
Awesome. I'll be voting for myself, by the way.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.